right, welcome to the show. This is Consulting Talk Live. My name is Russell Pearson, and if you haven't already, go to russellpearsonprograms.com and you can actually download a resource absolutely free for you to help you in your consulting practice. This is for consultants. This conversation is for those people who run a consulting business. And basically what I do is I take questions from you and I answer them live, which means that I don't have a lot of thought behind them. Sometimes I make a couple of quick notes, and that's what I certainly have done today. But we answer your calls. Now, today, the question that has come in is from Andreas. And Andreas asks, if I can find the actual question, I'll bring it on screen. With the rise of, technology, digital technologies that are happening out there, what are some innovative ways that I am using AI in my consulting practice? Absolutely. We'll answer that question and also talk about some other things that other people are doing and where I think that it's valuable and considerations that I think are worth the consultant, especially a consultant who is looking to be proactive, a consultant who's looking to be leveraged, can absolutely use to accelerate the results in their consulting practice. So acceleration is certainly one of the reasons that we use these things, getting things done faster, getting results faster, and leverage is the big one. Because if anybody, is this the first time you've seen our work, the Select Consulting model is a model that we recommend for any consulting practice who wants to be sort of solo plus. It's you with your expertise, a specialist consultant. And you may have a VA, but you may have artificial intelligence, right, to help you in your assistance of running your practice. So there's a few things that I'm doing that you may tell me they're not innovative. I don't know, but I find that they're practical more than innovative is why I use them. Because, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, the big issue that sort of gets in the way, I think, for most consultants and in general, in most business owners, when it comes to technology, is there's all these things that they can do, but they don't do them because they're not part of their general workflow. So you've got to make these things part of your general workflow. In other words, this is what we do to get business done. And when that's the case, then you start to use these technologies. And when you use the technologies, you get better at the technologies, and then it becomes more useful for you. So what am I doing? Well, I am certainly using things like generative AI, and mainly probably for two tasks. One is for writing. I'm not using it to write my content necessarily. I'm using it to brainstorm ideas about how I can look at my existing content and come at it from a different angle. So I find writing is a very useful, practical, and physical exercise that every consultant should be doing in some form, whether that be on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. Writing and thinking about your area of expertise. Now, it's not just so that you get smarter and understand your own area of expertise more, but so that you can communicate it, right? So you don't all have to be trainers, but in the process of working with people as a consultant, whether you're educating them, whether you're just getting them to make decisions, you've got to meet your client where they're at. And so a large part of that is actually doing that communication work. And a large part of the communication work is unpacking that on your own, not always just with the client. So writing is a really useful way of doing that. What I do with the writing then is I then ask things like ChatGPT or other generative AIs, what's another way that I can come at this topic? What is another perspective? And I ask it often to be a devil's advocate in what am I missing here? That's a big one. And then I also use it from a brainstorming point of view of I'm thinking of doing this. What are the risks? What are the issues? How is this aligned to the goals that I've told you that I have? And so I use it as a bit of an accountability partner. Now, when it comes to generative AI, right now, they tend to be agreeable, right? So they tend to be a yes man or yes woman rather than the devil's advocate. So you kind of need to mentor them into that space. You've got to get them to be a little rough with you at times. And so the best results I've got from generative AI is, and ChatGPT is the main one I use. I also use Sintra. That's a software that basically brings multiple agents together that have like a focus. So you'll have a number of employees. Sintra is Sintra, if you're wondering about the spelling of that. But you will have a person who's looking after marketing, a person who's after social media, another person who's after looking after the finance side of the business, another person who's just a general assistant. They have all these different skills, and it's 12 or 13 different assistants that you can use. And anyway, the way I get it to be more effective is that out of the box, most of these AIs are average at best, right? They're taking the information and the knowledge of the world, the internet basically. And back in the day, it's not even that long ago. It was before 2021. Now it's current data because they can actually scrape and use they can search the web like live now. But it uses that general consciousness and says, here's my answer, which means that it's going to be average. Now, you as a specialist consultant are above average, right? You have expertise. You are better than most people in your skill set and in your area of knowledge, your topic area, which means that it's not going to outperform you in that space unless you mentor it to do that. Now, I think agents and GPTs, which is like creating a specific focus for your generative AI, is a good way of doing that. So it remembers your parameters more. But what I do is, like, for instance, this is what I did with the writing. I would write an article and I would get it to improve it. And then it basically improved it from a grammar point of view. And, then there's the Australian versus US spelling issues. So we'll put that to the side. But it didn't do much better. And so I got a little rough with it. I'm saying, why aren't you introducing thoughts around the hero's journey? Why are we not looking at hooks? Why are we not looking at story parameters? Why are we not looking at ways to do subtle calls to action? And it goes, oh, sorry, yep, we'll add all that in. And so it adds that information. I'm saying, remember to add all that information now every time we're doing an article. Okay, great. And so I get it to a point where it's still not as good as what I'm doing, but it's sort of like playing in the same space. And so I'm like, right, how can we now bring an archetype of the sort of language we want to use? I tend to use a magician archetype, which means creative, creation, transformational. And you'll have a different archetype depending on your brand or your business. And I asked it to bring that in. It goes, okay, yeah, we can do that. We can bring that in. And it brings it in this very heavy-handed way. Like it starts using the word magic, and it starts using the word, it literally calls itself a magician and calls me a magician. I'm like, no. How do we do that in a subtle way? How do we bring instead of telling people, how do we show them that we are the thing rather than tell them we are the thing? And it goes, okay, understand what you're saying. And it did another run. And I'm like, that's better. And it was much better. It was starting to get to the level of writing that I can do manually. I'm like, all right, well, let's make this better. Let's look at how we can improve the influence in there. So let's bring in the, Cialdini's influence or persuasion techniques. All right, we'll do that. And then we added that in and it became more persuasive. I'm like, all right, this is cool. And I had to keep pushing it to be subtle. It have to be like, bring it down, make it subtle, show, don't tell. And then it produced something that was like better than what I would normally do. I'm like, this is actually really good. Then I asked it, are you using this other framework and this other framework as part of this mix? And it goes, no, I'm not. I'll add that in. It added it in. I'm like, boom, it's better than what I can do. And it was. And then I decided to ask it one final question. What haven't I asked you to put in here? What frameworks or methodologies have I not added in here to make this more influential? And it told me about two that I sort of had an idea about, but I didn't know very well. I'm like, wow, all right, now, because it has the knowledge, it can access the knowledge, but it doesn't because it plays to average. So you as a mentor, because you have experience and expertise, you can get it to do better. And so getting it to do better got it to a place where it was now pumping out articles and pumping out writing that was better than I could do. Now, I'm still doing the writing because I find the writing process really useful for myself, my brain, my own learning. Yeah. Once you're actually teaching people, that's the method of learning. That's a large method of learning the subtleties in what you're teaching. And so I still do that process. But what I do as well is I go, all right, now take this article and make it adjust it for a LinkedIn post, adjust it for a Facebook post, adjust it for an Instagram post. And it goes, it just does it all for me. And it does it better than I could do because it knows the algorithm and the styling of each of those platforms better than I do. Right. So anything that it can do better than you, so anything that you're below average on, get an AI to do it because it'll instantly be at least average. But anything that you're above average on, you've really got to mentor the system through. Now, there are other softwares that I'm looking at. There's one in particular that I might actually do some work with in the very near future that is taking project information from a client and actually creating a framework and a rubric and an assessment tool on where is the company, where can it go, calculate what level it's at in all these different areas, and actually give us a growth path on if we do this, and this, then we'll be able to reach the goal that we're trying to achieve. And it instantly puts those things in. So I'm looking at that model, and I'm looking at it for my own business, but I'm also looking at it for other consultants. So we might talk about that a little bit more, and I'll reveal what that software is. But I think what's key is that there's all these softwares being generated all the time. And some of them are slow to market and they're going to miss the boat, and some of them are fast to market. And if they capture the market in a way that they do one thing very well rather than trying to be everything to everybody, then they will keep that market while they improve, right? And so understanding going to market with a simple result, but an effective result, is so much better than going with like 10 different things that are mediocre, because the mediocre doesn't become sticky. If you can get one thing to do one thing effectively, then it sticks with the client, and then you can introduce new ideas to this base of clients you've now got. So there are softwares out there. I think you should always be looking at them. So wherever your market is, so my market is consulting, so I look at consulting software. Now, that's not just because I'm a consultant, because technically I'm a coach. I could look at coaching software. But if let's say that you were doing, what am I going to do? Let's say that the focus of your consulting practice was construction. You should be, at least some of the time in a week, having a look at the different construction softwares that are being developed. Now, 5 years ago, we could pretty much know what was being developed and what was available and what was best use case. But now we can't, because they're constantly being developed. And so how can you stay up to date? Well, you've got to spend a little bit of time searching and looking within your niche, within your market, so that you can stay up to date for your clients. Now, that doesn't mean you're the one who's going to recommend the software, but you need to at least be valuable enough to understand when they're talking about certain softwares, what they're trying to do with those things, be aware of what's available, so you can help provide more value to them, either by increasing the performance of something, speeding up the results of something, reducing the risk of something, reducing the cost, right? So all these different elements are how we add value to clients. So even just looking at the software for your clients is an incredibly valuable step for you to be doing. And so less innovative, but certainly a really useful process. I think the one thing I want to end on, and by the way, if you haven't gone to russellpearsonprograms.com, downloaded the resource there, go and do that, because it's absolutely free, and we'll just send it directly to your email. But the thing that I find is the biggest challenge when it comes to AI is the same challenge that has been here for 15, maybe 20 years. 20 years ago, there were automation softwares that people could use, and there were automation softwares that people did buy. And there are CRMs, and there are all sorts of other project management tools. And the majority of people, unless it was their job to do it, unless they were a production manager or a sales manager, they would not actively use the software. So there are some amazing automations that you can do right now that people are just not doing, because it's almost like they got the software and it ticked a box in their head that said, they now have automation. They now have systems, right? That's a big one. I now have systems. Well, what systems have you got? I've got this one. What are you using it for? Well, we haven't implemented it yet. That becomes a ridiculous conversation that I've had with so many different people. So let me just check something. I just want to have a quick peek. That's all good. Yeah. So the looking at your business, we did some work with a client, been in the Forge for quite some time, and we want to sort of reduce the amount of effort that he's having to put into the business, because it's a grind, some of the work. Well, all right, let's identify the things that are the biggest grind, and let's put a process in to manage them. So first, a process. Like, what are the steps that we need to take? What is the process that we need to put in place? And then once we've got that correct, we can systemize and automate it. And so just simple things like when a new client comes on board, rather than having to tell his VA the client's now on board, send them the welcome email, and then following up with making sure they've got the data and all these different things, we can actually run a process that's in a piece of software that sends something to the VA, sends something to the client, actually identifies if they've done the thing we want to do with it. And if they don't, do a follow-up. And if they still don't, prompt the VA or the staff member to call that person to confirm that they've got it. All that can be put together in one very simple workflow or automation within the software. And so it takes care of, like, let's in a client engagement, it's still it's probably about 20 minutes worth of work every time. And if we put it in place, it's like 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes is all, you're all getting it back. And so that's just one automation. And so just because we can put these automations in place does not mean we're going to put these automations in place. Just because we can use this artificial intelligence doesn't mean we're going to use this artificial intelligence. And so in a recent conversation with someone else, the conversation was, how do we move from, yes, we can use AI to add value, to actually really dedicating ourselves to go, all right, what is the AI first? Like, how can we use this to accelerate our result, to reduce our workload, to reduce our cost? Any of those benefits we can implement with a piece of software. And the only way we're going to start using it effectively is to practice. And so how can we put those practices in place so that we make sure that it is happening on a regular basis? And when we do that, it's fantastic, because we become practiced at it, we become very useful at it, and we become very effective at it. So just noticed my light is on a timer, I think. So that way, yes, that one. There's a light there, and there's lights behind here. They'll turn back on at some point, I'm sure, but I'm going to end it there. Again, if you haven't gone to russellpearsonprograms.com, you can actually get the free resource there immediately. But probably more important than that, I'm going to put it into the chat. https:// consultingquestions.com is where you can add a question. So it's in the chat. If you haven't seen it, go and have a look at it. Click on it. You can add a question. I don't care what it's about, but as long as it's in the realm of consulting, would love to answer it for you here. I love getting these questions. This one was submitted by a viewer, Andreas, today, which is fantastic. Sometimes I get the questions from inside my group, which is the Forge and the Consulting Guild. If you're ever interested in knowing about those, just raise your hand and ask the question, and I'll share some information. But we don't need to be in there to have this conversation. Just go to consultingquestions.com, ask a question, and ideally you may see it featured on the show. Until next time, stay passionate. My name's Russell Pearson. Bye for now.